This documentary is so searing, so scathing, and so intensely personal that any woman watching can't help but contemplate her own, her mother's, her grandmother's experiences of childbirth. I don't have children, but I found myself thinking about the stories my grandmother told me, the secret stories that women share with each other, and ones I hadn't thought about for decades. My Baba was the one who told me how my mother, already in her 30s, went through 36 hours of labor while trying to deliver my brother, my older brother, about how she and my brother almost died. She told me how my father, who was not an overly religious man, sat in the hospital waiting room all night, beside himself with fear, reading the Bible and praying for them. And then of the joy they all felt when the doctors saved both my mom and my brother by performing an emergency cesarean section. There was no talk of my mom having her tubes tied that night, and that was a lucky thing for me, because just over a year later, she had me in a planned cesarean. Things went like clockwork that time. My Baba had a story too. She was married at 18, and by her early 20s, she had 3 children. She and my grandfather were both Ukrainian immigrants. She had a grade 5 education. He worked nights at a restaurant in downtown Winnipeg. It was in the very depths of the Depression, the Dust Bowl on the prairies, the dirty 30s, everyone called it. They lived in a 3-room shack with no running water, and my Baba discovered that she was pregnant again. She confessed to me one day that she told her obstetrician, Dr. McTavish, that she wanted to give the baby up for adoption, that she and her husband could simply not afford another child. But what he told her was this. He said, "Helen, all babies need is love. You and Harry will find a way." So maybe he overstepped there. It might not have been the most practical advice, but she trusted him. In fact, she told me one time he'd accepted a chicken as payment for service from her one time because she didn't have any money. And I know she appreciated the vote of confidence that he gave her. So in the end, I had an Uncle Mike, and we all did love him. Those are the stories that formed my basis of understanding about having children, that during good times and hard times, easy and difficult pregnancies, doctors and nurses are there to help and support worried, terrified, and at-risk moms, to facilitate their hopes and dreams of motherhood, not to steal them away. But the women in this documentary have a completely different story to tell. They're told, "You already have too many children. You are poor and you can't look after them," while my own grandmother was encouraged to add one more. Or else it's, "You're too old, it's too dangerous for you to have another child." But no one ever tried to force my mom to sign away her fertility in her weakest moment. There's really only one word to use to square this, and it's racism. As the documentary shows, at what were then called Indian hospitals, there used to be actual quotas, setting out the number of children the women there were allowed to have, by what age, before they would be subject to sterilization. There was other eugenics legislation in Canada too, notably the Sexual Sterilization Acts in BC and Alberta. They targeted intellectually and mentally disabled women. Now, thankfully, those laws were repealed in the 1970s, as were the explicit racist policies of forced sterilization of Indigenous women. But as we learn, that never really went away. It just became more hidden, and it expanded to target other racialized women, notably in Montreal's Black community. In his interview, the head of the Canadian Medical Association says the doctors and nurses are acting in what they believe is their patients' best interest, just in a misguided way. That it's a byproduct of a kind of paternalism or professional arrogance. He does acknowledge, though, the unconscious racial bias in the healthcare system. That racism, of course, is not always so unconscious. We all saw the video of nurses in Joliette, Quebec, abusing a distraught Indigenous woman, Joyce Echaquan, in the hours before she died. "The only thing she's good at is having sex," says one. "Maybe you should think of your children," adds another. So there it was on display for all the world to see, the racist archetype of the unfit mother. By any analysis, forced sterilization is bad medicine. It violates all modern understanding of informed consent, It is not emergency surgery that needs to be performed during a cesarean section, not ever. What it is, though, is irreversible. The United Nations says it's a form of torture. In Canada, it's a continuation of a genocide. The women in this documentary describe the loss of their fertility as a violation, a wound that never heals, a loss of identity, of dignity. But one of the hardest things to hear them say is that they feel ashamed because they blame themselves for letting it happen. We can only hope that the work of these two committed and talented journalists makes it clear to them and the countless others we don't even know about yet. The shame lies only with the rest of us for letting it continue. What happened to these women can never be remedied, but this practice can stop, maybe once and for all. So I would like to congratulate Judith Plamondon and Sylvie Fournier for making this powerful, necessary, and unforgettable documentary. And Sylvie Fournier is here to accept the prize tonight.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that amazing introduction. It was really moving to see all these women again. I have been in touch with them, but it's very emotional for me. So bonsoir. Judith had so wanted to be with us tonight, but as it happens, she's about to give birth. It's a true gift of life, and it's the one that was denied the women in our story, and to so many more. So on behalf of both of us, thank you. Thank you to the jury for this awesome recognition. Thank you to the Foundation for supporting investigative journalism in Canada. And congratulations to everyone who is being honored here tonight. I cannot describe to you the look of disbelief on the face of my editor-in-chief when I suggested this story. We were in a Zoom meeting, of course, with our executive producer, and I could see their faces in close-up. And I could see how this seemed so unthinkable to them. I could see that in their eyes. But I'm lucky. I work for a program where we have the time and the resources to tackle very difficult stories. And I'm kind of proud tonight to see that I'm walking in the steps of José and Emmanuel, who've been here before. Meeting Elisa Lombard and Ariane Métellis in Montreal was a turning point, and actually Joyce Echaquin's story was the starting point of our own. That's what put us on this path. But of course, I wouldn't be here tonight without the women who decided to share their stories with us. And I thought maybe I could share with you one of the challenges that we were faced with. When I started this project, I reached out to Suzy Basile. She leads the Canada Research Chair on Indigenous Women Issues. And I thought she'd be happy to learn that we were going to expose this problem. But that was not her reaction at all, actually. She said to me, "Are you really going to do this? Have you considered what you are going to put these women through, what they are going to feel like when they give you this interview and in the following days and weeks, and when the story is aired, and that they have to face public opinion?" And I thought, I've done sensitive stories before in the past, and I've often been told that I'm gentle and thoughtful. There's always this, fine ethical/professional line that we try not to cross. And I'm sure you will agree with me that there's also this imbalance of power between the journalists and their source. They entrust me with their story, though I will be the one writing it in the end. I will have the final word. But I care. You care. We all do. We're not the type to just harvest a story and run away without considering the fallout, right? She meant something more than that. What Suzy Basile meant is that for sharing and also hearing these stories can actually trigger a very powerful emotional and sometimes physical reaction to people who have experienced other difficult things. and think about what we have worked on as journalists in the last few years in Canada. Murdered women, murdered Indigenous women, missing children, abuse in residential schools, and now unmarked graves. As you said, Bonnie, many of the doctors and nurses who took part in this horrible practice did not see themselves as causing harm. They probably thought that they were well-meaning. So this is the challenge. How do we cover the real damage that was done without becoming this well-intended white person that reopens the wound? That's what she wanted me to understand. So I took her words to heart and asked the women, what can we do? How can we support you? We even had a small budget set aside for this, actually, but most of them rejected the idea of a professional support. They came up with beautiful solutions. They suggested to turn to close friends, a healer in their community, an elder, or someone from one of the Native Friendship Centers that we have in Quebec. One of them actually had her entire family surrounding her during the interview. It was almost joyous. And the next day she wrote, and she said, I'm not feeling well. I can't do this, Sylvie. I won't out. And I said, sure, it's okay. And this was really hard because her testimony was really compelling. She was actually going to be one of the leads in the story. And you know how good we are at convincing people? I chose not to do that. I just let go. I am happy to report that the other women who stayed on are okay. Some of them have actually felt that this allowed them to overcome the shame that they had felt inside of them for so long. So what we did is not revolutionary in any way. It's a little bit further than what we usually do. And that's why I am really grateful to them tonight. And not only because they broke, in some cases, decades of silence, if you think about that, decades of silence and family secrets, to share their stories. It's also because they taught me something about covering trauma. Maybe not in a perfect way, but certainly in a better way. After the program was aired, the Quebec government vowed to end this practice, and I know that the College of Physicians in Quebec is actually reminding its members right now that this is not a medical issue. This is a legal issue. It's an issue of consent, right? But this is going to take a while to change, and I'm aware of that. It's not over yet. So I hope that by shining this beautiful light on our piece tonight, you will help draw the public's attention back to it and contribute to the changes that are still needed. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.